All right. Well, welcome to another expert interview. I always say I'm excited for today's guest, but I am excited. Greg and I got to spend a lot of time in the desert together and really got to know each other. I've got his book sitting in front of me, which I know we're going to dig into and talk about it. And, being someone that is a connector and loves connecting, a really important part of that is the conversations we're having. And I think that's what we're going to have a lot of fun digging into today. And so, with that, Greg, welcome. And why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Well, Devin, thanks for having me on the show. Gary, to be good to be with you as well. Uh, I'm Greg Stevens. I wrote a book called uh, Build New Bridges, The Art of Restoring Impossible Relationships. I'm an executive coach, podcaster. I have a podcast called A Shot of Inspiration. It's about inspirational stories from different people around the world. Um, I got into coaching back in full time back in 1999. And when I first started, I was teaching man woman relationship work and never thought I would be doing any of this work. I was a sales rep for many years before that. But I've had a very fun and a very diverse life. And so I've jumped around a lot of areas, but I love coaching. I love seeing people have breakthroughs. And I specifically want people to have breakthroughs around the relationships. And what I tell people all the time, most of us avoid conflict. But if you're avoiding conflict, you're avoiding your breakthrough. So you don't get to have a breakthrough until there's conflict. And that's what I help people with, how to engage with that conflict. Most people will tell you you need to go have this conversation with a person or a family member or your boss or a client, but no one really tells you how to do it. So I teach people how to do that, how to manage their emotions, how to create psychological safety, how to position their message, how to put it together, and how to listen. And then also how to hold people accountable after the conversation, because many times people fail to keep their agreements. And that's another type of conversation, how to hold someone accountable in a way that's going to build the relationship rather than damage it even more.
That's so awesome, man. Thank you again for taking the time. I know before we hit record, you were talking about you just got back from traveling to Costa Rica, which is
Yeah.
great. And thank you for sharing some of that story and pictures with us. Um, Talk to me about a hard conversation. Like let's really ground this. So give us your hardest conversation or one that stands out and
Yeah.
kind of how you had to move through this yourself. And then we'll start dissecting what's the process and approach.
Well, the reason I wrote the book was because I've been teaching with, I taught four crucial conversations for years. I was one of their master trainers. Once I released my book, I kind of went completely on my own. I've always kept my independent status. But when I talk about a hard conversation, it could be with your boss. It could be with a direct report, maybe a colleague, maybe even a difficult client. It's those conversations we tend to say, I wish I didn't have to have this. And then we put them off until the absolute last minute, and then we'll have it if we have to. Sometimes we'll let relationships go for days, weeks, sometimes months and years before we ever engage with them. And it's because we don't understand emotional accounting. And I'll talk about that in a little while. We don't know how to look at a spreadsheet on our own emotions, the cost it takes from us. But it's those conversations we tend to avoid. And we also get really good at tricking ourselves into saying, it's okay, I don't need to really have that one. But you feel it's a pull of your energy. It takes it away. You see, you might avoid the person. And I didn't just by osmosis pick these skills up. I had to do a lot of work in them. And I had taken crucial conversations when and then I decided to talk to the authors, was able to sell it. I was early on, I was what they called an associate. I sold the material and taught it. And as I was teaching it, I thought, now, how can I be the type of leader that practices what they teach? I wanted to be someone with an experience about what I was talking about rather than a theory. So I had this crazy idea that I would go clean up all my past relationships. When I say clean up a past relationship, think about you're walking down the hallway and you see someone walking your way, and there's another way to get to your office where you don't have to pass that person. You take that exit. That's the way you go to back to your job. That was a conversation I needed to clean up. And on that list, I had 36 different people. It took me nearly 2.5 years to do it. Some were business, some were personal. Some of those conversations were one and done. Some took one person took me 7 different times, but it took me 2.5 years to have all those conversations. Now, I tell people all the time, people say, well, are you expecting me to do that? Not at all. I just wanted to write the book. So if you decided there was a couple you wanted to have, that you would actually have access and understand how to go approach that conversation, not from just a theoretical point of view, but someone who's actually done it.
I love that. And I'm glad you went to the 36. I was going to force you there if you didn't. Because I know in the opening chapter, and we talked about this in your book, it was really cool to watch how you navigated and kind of hear those little glimpses in there. And then you ended with your dad. And I think we should probably lean in there for a second because I think everyone probably has a relatable family member moment or experience or one of those conversations you're avoiding. So, well, why don't you give us the snapshot of that story and kind of what you learned going through that process?
Yeah, well, in my book, the first chapter is my hardest crucial conversation. It's the very last one of those 36. It was the one I put off that I didn't want to have. And in the book, I walk people through how it went. And what I tell people all the time, it doesn't go the way I had planned it out in my head. They rarely do. And it didn't go the way I wanted it to initially, but it eventually turned around into a way where I ended up having an amazing relationship with my father, even though we didn't see eye to eye on most anything before he passed away. But I was able to clean up everything with my father in a way where it created a whole different relationship for us that I considered impossible. I never even thought when I went to have the conversation with my father that we would end up ever being friends. It was just, it wasn't possible from what I looked at. And what I've found over and over as I've coached this, when you go and have the conversation, it's interesting. The universe, God, whatever you want to call it, shows up and amazing things happen, but we have to have the courage to actually go in and have the conversation. And as one of the things I find also is you're not going to have courage if you don't know how to do something. So that goes back to a skill set. Most people are motivated really to want to go clean up one or two. But if you don't know how, I'm not going to mess it up further. I'm not going to take the time. But when someone shows you how, a whole different reality can show up. And that's what happened for my father and all. Before he passed away, my father became one of my closest friends. He even asked me to speak at his funeral. And it was such a cleansing piece of memory that I have because I had nothing else to say. As I've spoken to many groups throughout the world about this story with my father, so many people come up to me and say, you know what, my father's already passed away. I don't have that chance. And that's one of the things I really want people to think about. What if things weren't, your loved one wasn't around tomorrow, you didn't get to say what you really wanted to? I think it's so important that we do that because there was a completion for my father, but there was also a completion for me. And I can tell you what I used to speak so poorly of my father before I did this work. Now I can't even remember any of the bad stories because I healed. And when there's real healing going on, you don't live in that past. So many people, that's a real key. If you find yourself complaining about something in the past, you probably haven't healed over it because it doesn't hold that power over you. From what I've learned, cleaning up all those relationships.
That's awesome, man. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, in the book, I know that's the thing. It hit me quick and hard, like, oh, okay, I see how real you're getting right now.
Huh.
Um, So once someone identifies the 1, 2, 10, 20, however many they think they need to have,
Yeah.
um, what's next? Like, how do we go through the process? Walk us through your process.
Yeah.
Give us some education.
Well, it's interesting. I want to say this up front. Some people come to me say, well, should I have this conversation? I don't know whether you should or shouldn't. That's up to you. I'm not out saying you need to go have these. I'm giving you an option if you choose to, a way to possibly do that. So I have no judgment. I don't know your situation. Some people came from terrible abuse, and mine was somewhat at that level. But at the same time, I don't know what your situation is. So please hear me in this. If you decide you don't want to go clean up a relationship, I support you in that. It's your life. You get to make that choice. I just want to give you a choice rather than a reaction. Most people, if you're in reaction, there really is no choice there. I'm in reaction. But if you have a choice, you can look at it and go, you know what? This isn't going to serve me to do this, or there's going to be many different things you'll consider. But if you decide to go do it, then I want to give you an avenue. And that avenue is, if you get the book, you'll start to see the first thing is you got to get yourself in the right place to have the conversation. That's the biggest barrier in any of these conversations. It's us. We want to look at it's the other person. We want to blame because it's easy and convenient. There's a quote I put throughout my book, and it's my mantra I've lived my life by since 2001. And here's the mantra: everything in my life I create, promote, or allow. Everything in my life I create it, I promote it, or allow it. So if you look at your relationship from that and you consider that question, should you go clean it up? You get to be the decision maker on that. But I've got to make sure when I go in as my best. In cleaning up my relationship, many times it wasn't anything the other person had done or said. It was me needing to speak my truth in a way where I could let go of it. Many times I find we hold on to conversations because we've never spoken what we really thought or felt. So it stays within us and it burns us, and it burns within us, and it keeps showing up. But what if I were able to get that out of there? I were able to say it in a way where the other person didn't feel blamed, but they understood why I felt what I felt. Just me. And that's what I learned to do. And so many of them were cleaning up those relationships, were just speaking my truth and engaging with the person in a conversation. Did they mean to do that? Did they even know it was going on? Many of the conversations I had, people didn't even know that I felt harmed, or because I had never spoken it. I acted like everything was fine. And that's another thing. We play with our head. In the absence of information, we make it up. But the problem is, once we make it up, we act like that negative story in our head is the way it is. And it's just a story in our head that's going on. So the first thing we got to do is manage ourselves. That means I've got to make sure I manage my emotions. I own what my part is going out. The first thing I tell people, you have to own your side of the street. You know what? I haven't spoken to you in 7 years because I didn't know how to do it. I'm trying a new stab at this because I learned something new. That's on me. We haven't spoken. Not, you should have called me. I have to own that that's mine. Then I have to make sure that I manage my emotions. I don't get my buttons pushed. And we talk about how to create that throughout the book. You have to be able to manage that. Then you have to watch for when others might get upset or shut down. It's for the same reason they feel psychologically unsafe. So we teach people how to create that psychological safety in the moment, and how to structure their message when they're ready to give it. I typically like to, today when I go into a crucial conversation, the first thing I want to do is I want to ask questions. I don't want to start out with what I know. I want to ask questions. Let me ask you, how's the relationship going for you? Or is there something I've done that has you avoiding me? I don't know. I need to try to find out. I need to listen with intent and try to understand. So there isn't any really one way. I teach people the dance moves. If you were to put it together, what is the dance move when this comes up? What do you do here? In essence, I give them a toolbox that they can reach to. And I use crucial conversations because I taught it so long. Their skill sets are powerful. But what I found also, many times people take crucial conversations and they learn the training, but they never have the conversations or they don't go practice. That's where my master team programs come into play, where I actually bridge the gap between the knowledge and the application. We put it together. So that's kind of how we, there is no really one answer. It's a process, but you need to have all the skill sets. I tell people all the time, it's kind of like going out and you're a lumberjack. And let's say it's 200 years ago. All you got is an axe. What if you walked out there with a chainsaw? What would that be like? You have a whole different tool to do things with. And that's what I typically find. Most people believe it's impossible because they have a past experience that went poorly. And during that experience, neither party had the skills to do it. You had explosive emotions, and they have all the evidence in the world that it can't be done. So it stays impossible. But I can't tell you how many times with new skills, people have a new approach, a different way to do it. What seemed impossible typically can become possible in that moment.
That's awesome. Talk to me about the emotions. Let's go there because I think that that's something that I could see as being a big sticking point when I role play what this scenario may be, right? Which you said likely may not be the truth and often isn't. But how do you control your own emotions? What are some tips there? And then if you want to jump into like, what do we do if someone we're talking to has big emotions?
Yeah, I think for you, these conversations are always going to have explosive emotions because it's impossible to us. It didn't just become impossible. It became impossible because we reacted poorly or someone else did in the conversation. And we either walked away from it or we pushed our own agenda. All that comes from what we tell ourselves in our head. So you've heard the thing, some people say, oh, you make me mad. Well, no one makes you mad. You choose to be mad. No, most people don't want to hear that. But there's what happens and what you make it mean. There's a huge difference between the two. Typically, we see something and we create meaning to it. And so there's a lot, and we do this in everything we see. We see someone running across the street. We automatically create, oh, there's a car coming, or they're in a hurry, or our brain is designed to do that automatically. And what we do is we tell ourselves a story or we create our own meaning in that moment. And this is just how we are as human beings. We cannot change that. What we can do is change how we engage with that. Because when I see that, I can say, well, is there another possibility why they're running across the street? Maybe the pavement's hot. I don't know. There's a lot of other things but here's what I tell people all the time. Your first reaction is your worst reaction. Because we're in fight or flight mode. That's what happens to us, is that we're designed to actually see those things to keep ourselves safe. And that works if you're, out in the jungle and you hear a noise, go into fight or flight mode, that'll save you. But it doesn't help you if your boss is walking by your cubicle and says, hey, Devin, come to my office, closed door behind you. Now, your brain shuts down in that moment and you go to fight or flight. In that moment, you only have two choices, attack or withdraw. We don't see a third alternative. And here's the thing, rarely is it in our society this or that. Maybe with politics and everything, we act like it is, but there's a third alternative, maybe a fourth, fifth, or sixth. But we have to turn our brains back on. And when you have a physical reaction, the way you turn your brain back on is you pose questions to yourself. If you have the presence of mind, when you get upset, maybe asking myself, what else could be true? Devin's trying to Devin went behind my back and talked to the boss. Well, he's out to get me. He's a backstabber. He's a liar. Okay. Well, what else could be true? Maybe he was backed into a corner and had to give the boss an answer that maybe I didn't like. Or maybe I didn't do my job. Or maybe I misunderstood everything that's gone on. I need to ask a couple of questions. Just asking questions flips you from your reactionary brain, the amygdala, when you go into fight or flight, to the neocortex, the prefrontal lobe, the largest area of your brain. And what happens in that moment, your brain can turn on. All of your creative thought process and problem solving happen in the neocortex. And asking yourself questions actually flips the switch to go from your reactive brain to your reflective brain, so you can actually begin to see things more clearly. And all I'm asking you to do is get curious, not judgmental. Asking yourself questions helps you get curious to say, maybe I missed something here. Maybe there's a question I could ask. But the thing that gets in our way is that insatiable need to be right. Because the moment we tell ourselves a story, we want to be right about it. We act like the story we told ourselves is true. And then we come locked in our point of view. And let's say you're right 85% of the time, you're right on something. That's a high amount, by the way. Okay. But let's say you're right 85% of the time. What problems does that other 15% give you if you were just curious and open all the time? That's just it. I might be right. But one of the things I've also found, if I'm right, I really don't have to battle that I'm right. If I say 2 + 2 is 4 and someone wants to argue that it's 5 or 6, I don't get upset about that. I just kind of went, yeah, you're wrong. And, let's look at this. But when we get an emotional attachment, what the problem becomes, we don't see ourselves. And then we become the problem in the whole conversation, because that's all the other person sees. They see us raising our voice, pointing our finger, trying to convince them of something. And no one likes to be told what to do. So I'm going to resist that, because here's the thing. Well, I'm passionate about it. Well, you're also blind to what your behavior is showing the other person. And if you want to be a great communicator, the first step is you got to manage your own emotions, because otherwise you're the problem in every conversation you have. And most people say, well, I'm passionate. That's just who I am. Or I'm type A personality. Or I'm brutally honest. You know what brutally honest is? Brutally honest is honesty without compassion. Honesty without compassion is brutality. Or honesty without respect is brutality. But what if I could be honest and respectful? What if I could be honest and compassionate, but I can't do it unless I manage my own emotions? So that's the first place you've got to look. And here's the thing. It's hard to do, because we typically in that moment see the threat out there. We don't see ourselves. So it's the last thing we see. Think about when you go into a room, what's the last thing you see? You never see it. You don't see yourself. See everything else that's going on. But you know what? Everyone sees you. And that's the blinding piece. So here's the big neon sign. The moment you believe you're right, you should probably start asking questions. But here's the thing. The moment we believe we're right, we're not asking questions. Why? Because we're right. I've got the right answer. It'd be stupid to look for another answer. There's also, it's kind of egotistical to think you've got the right answer every time, or that there's only one way to do something. There's typically many ways to do it.
That's awesome. Talk to us about the other person now. So I think we have a good idea of you owning your responsibility, you stepping up and deciding. Again, and I love that you gave permission. We're only talking about the conversations you want to have.
Yeah.
You get in there. I love to ask a question and stay curious. That's definitely something I preach all the time too with relationship building, is ask more questions, stay curious. What if the other person gets really elevated, gets combative, starts going there. How do we navigate that and not match that energy?
Yeah, and here's the thing, it's going to happen in nearly every conversation that's crucial. And that's one of the things I'll say. Crucial conversations is where I learned this piece. There's two keys to psychological safety. That's one of the things I used to be in sales. And I was always worried if I got a irate customer, what do I do? Well, taking crucial conversations gave me the answer I've been looking for years. It's one or both of these two things. Either the person doesn't believe you care about what they care about, mutual purpose, or they don't believe you care about or respect them, mutual respect. So, Devin, if I can see that you are reacting to what I'm saying, and when I say reacting, Devin might be shutting down, crossing his arms, looking away, or he might lock eyes, get loud, and point his finger. One is one's a level of silence, the other's what we call verbal violence. But both are based because of fear. I want you to remember this: fear always distorts. Let me say it one more time. Fear always distorts. It distorts the view of what's going on. And so when I see someone getting upset, they've got a distorted view of what I'm talking about. It is ridiculous to continue down that path until I create psychological safety, because they can't hear anything I'm saying. What people tend to do when I see someone get emotional on the other side, what we all tend to do is we double down on logic. Well, guess what? Logic is out the door already until I create that psychological safety. So I've got to stop talking about what I'm talking about. I shift the conversation over to a psychological safety conversation. In essence, I talk about, is there a breakdown of respect? Or where do you feel like I don't have your best in mind on this? Or let's talk about creating a common purpose where we don't see one right now. I'm going to make sure I have both of those in there, that I respect you, I care about you, and I care about what you care about. Think of it like that. That's what, when I'm talking to someone, my internal conversation that I'm not saying, but it's how can I show Devin I care about and respect him, and that I care about his goals as well. That's my internal conversation. And I stop talking about the late report, or being late to the meeting, or not getting this to me when he said he would. I stop talking about that, and I start talking about how we relate with each other. Let's talk about what respect looks like to us. I can see I've stepped over the line, Devin. Didn't mean to do that. What did I do that stepped over the line? Well, you're questioning me. Wow. Never meant to seem like I was questioning you. I'd like to understand a couple of things. Would that be okay? You got to create, and I ask a question, turning their brain back on. You have to be able to play with the other person, but you have to find out what that underlying issue is. Once I find that and I deal with either mutual purpose, mutual respect, or both, then we can come back and talk about missing the deadline, missing the date, whatever those problems are. I tell people all the time, when you go into these conversations, think about two things: the person and the problem. We typically just deal with the problem and we forget about the person. And we might get that thing fixed this time, but the next time creates another problem for us because I've got to work with Devin again. He's unreasonable. I don't want to have to do this. And the other thing is, a lot of these problems show up because we don't set up agreements ahead of time. We live in assumptions. We assume how we're going to work together. Most people listening to this, you don't have agreements with your boss or your direct report about how you'll talk about differences. And what if one of you bails to keep your agreement on how you set up how you're going to talk together? There's so many little levels in this, and that's just it. When you understand all of them, you can go and approach this conversation completely different. But what I have found is when I can take a pause, Devin, listen to the person, ask more questions, turn their brain back on, show them I care about them, I respect them, show about that I care about our differences, then we can ensue back into the conversation. But here's the other mistake. Most people think, oh, I did that, so I can get through the rest of the conversation. You might have to create safety anywhere between 15 to 30 times in a conversation. So there is no one size fits all. You have to, but here's what I tell people all the time: watch for safety when safety's at risk. Because just like driving, you look both ways when you pull out of the driveway in the morning and make sure nothing's coming. That's a safety skill that you do. Do you stop looking for other traffic the rest of the day? No, you're just getting started. And that's what every conversation needs to be. But it's just like driving. I want you to think about this. The first time you drove a car, I bet you felt really awkward the first time you were by yourself, even after you had all those lessons. There's that fear. Well, you've been talking your entire life, but when you take on a new set of skills, it takes time to develop that. That's what most people don't have the patience for. But as you practice over and over, they become second nature. But most of us don't practice enough for them to become second nature. That's why we grind the gears. When you think of it like shifting gears on a car, we grind them, or we get the wrong gear and we jerk the car. That's what we do typically in our conversations.
That's great insight. So mutual purpose, mutual respect. I hear you on that. I love the ask a question to turn their brain back on, right? Because we just talked about doing that for ourselves, right? If we're going down that path, we got to get back up here. So same with the other person. We have to realize that even if we think there's a path forward, there is nothing productive that's about to happen. So
Yeah.
you got to slow down, ask some questions, get them re-engaged, mutual purpose, mutual respect. That's great. I think that's a great nugget for people to take away. Talk to me about the next step. So let's say we get there, we can overcome the however many times that happens. We come to some sort of next step agreement. Do we just tie a bow on it and we're done with the meeting? Do we follow up? It's probably situational depending on the type of conversation we're having. Kind of close it out for us and tell us how we wrap up that conversation.
Yeah, I think all conversations need to have a completion, and that means you check back in to find out how things are going. Because thinking one conversation is going to change everything typically isn't. It's going to take several of them. And many times we need to check back, say, let's check back in 2 weeks and see if this is working for us. Let's find out again if there is. And what that does is put some responsibility in there. But even if you have all the skills and you make this great agreement, people are going to break their word. This happens, especially in a fast-paced technology world where we have so many things coming at us. We forget. I'm just going to say it. We forget. Why do you think I need to spend time? Someone takes a training class in Crucial Conversations. They need application because they're going to forget until you apply it. So you're going to forget those things. And many times there's many reasons why people don't keep their commitments. And we typically think it's one reason. Well, they're lazy. They don't care, or something like that. We attribute bad motives to the other person. But typically there's several different, many different possibilities why they might not know what to do next. That would be an ability barrier. We typically don't think about ability barriers when we're trying to hold someone accountable. Maybe someone didn't get them the material they needed in a certain amount of time. Maybe that would be someone else creating a problem that I'm not even talking to. Why did you get the report in late? Well, I was waiting for Devin to get me his numbers. Okay, well, I didn't ask that question before. I was just thinking you're lazy. Me addressing your motivation when there's an ability issue, that's just going to create frustration and break the relationship even more. So there's other areas you have to look at. You have to become, I call it an investigator. And there's different sources you can look at, both motivation and ability, to start to uncover that, to find the underlying cause. And typically what you'll find, there's many different reasons, and I can't remove those barriers until I deal with all those reasons. And people say all the time, what's the difference between a reason and an excuse? People speak reasons. By the time they hit our ears in that air, something changes and we hear excuses. Now, they could be excuses, but you get to make those decisions, whether it's a reason or excuse. You get to be the judge, but you don't get to be a really good judge unless you've heard all the information. So that's why it's so important to use your ears. That's the biggest thing I found throughout the years. Being able to absorb someone coming at you with a hard message and you not react is like a superpower. Because the moment you don't react and you start asking questions to them, well, what did you see me do? Help me understand your perspective. What happened here? Didn't mean to do that. Show me what you saw. All of a sudden, that other person starts to engage because they know I've heard them. Now, remember this, listening doesn't mean you agree with a person, but it does give you a place to ask questions, to break and that creates connection with the person as you begin to ask questions and engage. And I found that even the book I talk in there about my wife coming to me with a very difficult message one day, and everything in me wanted to tell her she was wrong. She was just dead wrong on it. But I kept my mouth shut. I started listening. And that's when the compassion came. That's when I got curious. And before you knew it, I could see what she saw. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, wow, I need to work on that. And what I also found was she had softened as I listened to her, to the point where she said, it's not your stuff, it's mine. I said, no, let me take a look at this. And I found there was truth in what she said, parts of it. And we had a great conversation about that. But what could have been a barrier to our relationship became a strong connector. And that's the power of being able to listen, to understand, to connect with that person and see the world through their eyes. That's just it. When you see someone who's upset, ask yourself, how can I get into the position to be able to see what they're seeing, to see why they'd be so upset? If I can make the distance through questioning and get there, I'm going to see something I might not have seen before. And then I'll be able to influence them with our conversation and maybe make some changes myself.
Talk to me about the importance of having a partner and support in this process. This is something that I think we've covered enough ground that you probably, as a listener or a watcher, can see a path forward. Maybe we've instilled a little confidence. Maybe we help you with the next hard conversation that comes your way, right? So that you can better handle it. But what I'm hearing is there's a lot of repetition. There's going to be a lot of moments where you're going to need someone to really reflect with and say, hey, Greg, like this happened. This is how I reacted. For sure, totally made a mistake. This is how they reacted. We ended up getting nowhere. Like it feels like you're going to need a community, someone to debrief with. You're going to need some support until you've done this a lot of times. So talk to me about the importance of either a mentor, a community. Like what's your best recommendation for getting through this?
Yeah, I'd say first, I had a coach, and I'm a coach, but mentor is fine. Someone you trust. You need someone you can bounce your message off of, because what sounds reasonable to you won't sound reasonable to someone who's outside of you. And so that's why it's good to have someone to say, hey, I need to have it might sound, hey, Gary, I need to have a conversation with Devin. Here's what I'd like to say. And then I lay it out. Gary's gonna go, no, this doesn't sound right, or this doesn't sound right. You're going to get into trouble here. And it's real easy to see it from a third party. It's hard to see it when you're in it. That's why it's so important. The other thing I tell people also is don't just leave it at learning and practicing. Once you do that, teach someone else. When you teach someone what you've learned, you learn it twice. I tell people all the time, you should be mentoring people. If you're a manager, you should learn this. I teach managers all the time. They teach their people. There's exercises I have people go through. They ended up putting their people through the same exercises, and it actually makes your investment dollars in yourself go much further for your organization. And we all need help. I mean, I've been doing this. I'm a professional mediator. I've coached thousands of individuals, trained hundreds of thousands of individuals. I still need help. I've got a group of coaches that I work with. And when I'm having a tough week, I go in and we talk about this, and they go, Greg, you walked in there without an open heart. And it's like, when I say open heart, most people are going, what do you mean? I wasn't open. I wasn't, I was judgmental rather than curious because it was too close to me. And one of the things I've learned, when I feel like I've got to go have a really difficult conversation, I'll call my coaches before I have it to this day if I need to prepare. So I think it's important that whoever it is, maybe even a spouse. What's another thing? It's hard to coach your spouse on things, though. That can be a tricky one, but I still ask my wife, and when I'm going to certain conversations, I'll ask my wife to coach me on them, especially when especially that's a whole nother conversation, the opposite sex, because men and women hear things very differently. Even though, we're all equal, we have different ways of looking at the world. And I think it's important to always tap into the people around you. We all need each other.
Couldn't agree more. I think even in the sales world, or when we're talking about connection meetings, it takes repetition and it takes feedback, right? Because you're gonna have meetings where you're like, felt like I asked all the right questions. I feel like I followed the script and there was no outcome. Okay, great. Let's talk about it, right? Like you got to reflect. So I love that. Other than buying your book, which they for sure should, how else can people connect with you? What are good next steps if they're like, Greg, I'm
Yeah.
interested. Give us some guidance on where to go.
Yeah, for what I do, we have a couple of programs. We have a mastermind around my book where people can come, and we'll just do it's a true mastermind. People come talk about their relationship or whatever they'd like to talk about. People jump in. I'll share my perspective, but we get it from everyone. It's a true mastermind. Then I have what's called a master team. And I put it together as a master team because it's a cross between a mastermind, a master class, group coaching, and sometimes individual coaching. So I put all of those things together, and we do it in either 3-month or 6-month programs. And by the end of that time, people should know how to have their conversations in that program. We do it in groups, but people make a list of conversations they need to either clean up, improve, or complete. And when I say complete, it may be you still have to work with a person, but you complete a situation where it has no more emotional tie to you. That's what we talk about. Sometimes it means you don't see that person again, but you complete it. You don't just ghost the person. You tie a bow on it and say, I'm choosing not to be here. So there's an empowerment around that. And we have everyone make a list when they come in. I never see the list. People will come back and say, I've had 3 people knock off my list. Great. Tell us what you learned. We're not going into, unless people share that, but they're learning how to do that. And then when people have a difficult conversation, they'll call me up and I'll have a one-on-one coaching piece with them privately on some of those conversations. So that's why I call it a master team, because it's a cross between all of those. And that's some of the work I do.
That's awesome. What's the website? Should they reach out to you on
Yeah.
LinkedIn? How should they get there?
Yeah, you can look me up on LinkedIn. You'll see me, Greg Stevens or Gregory Stevens, one of the two, STEPHENS. But our website is alignment-resources.com. Don't forget the dash. So alignment-resources.com. I have my Master Teams program on there. We also have other training programs with other coaches and trainers that I have engaged with over the years. We have some really cool ones. We have one person who actually puts together a team song, guy named Darden Smith. So we have a lot of different programs on our website. And then I have my podcast, which is a shot of inspiration .com. You can actually see some of our episodes on that. And then we also have on the first Tuesday of every month from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock Central Time, we have a thing called Build New Bridges panel discussion. And I have different coaches, different speakers. Devin's going to be on at some point when we get it all scheduled about connections. And we have different topics in that, but it's about building bridges and relationships around these different topics. But you can always get a hold of us at alignment-resources.com or contact me on LinkedIn or Greg at alignment-resources.com.
Awesome. And if you're watching or listening to this, we will put all those links below, link to the book, link to the website, link to LinkedIn, all that stuff will be there. And yes, I've been a guest as well. And so you'll see those links coming out, and looking forward to doing that. As we wrap up, Greg, could you give us one tool, one tip, super easy to implement, something that's just a little superpower igniter we can share with the audience? Give us one simple thing we can do today.
Okay. I want to give you two quick ones. One, when you go into these conversations, this is the hard part. You can't expect anything from the other person. You just can't. You can't control them. All you can do is control yourself. But what I want you to be able to do is show up strong. When you can show up in these conversations as your best, we tend not to fret about them afterwards because we showed up as our best. I find most people say, gosh, I wish I would have done this differently. But the one skill set that I'll share this with everyone, when you run into trouble, stop the conversation and go back to your best motive, your best intent. It might sound something like this. Devin, the reason I'm talking to you about this is I want to solve problem X, and I'd like to make our relationship stronger. That's what I'd like to do at the end of this conversation. Then you dive into it. Anytime it starts getting emotional, stop the conversation and say, you know what, Devin? I can tell this isn't going where I wanted it to. Remember what I said? I wanted to make sure we solve this problem and build the relationship. What do we need to do to make sure we do that? Then talk about that. Then go back to talk about what you're doing. You might have to go back to your best intent 10, 15, 20 times, but it will be worth it rather than walking away saying that person, they don't have anything good to say, or I don't care to have a relationship with them. They're not worth it. Folks, I believe our relationships are what make us successful when you really think about it. And if you want to have a successful life, have successful relationships.
Greg, I appreciate that. Maybe we'll, Gary, if we want to grab that quote, I like that from a scripting standpoint. That's awesome. Greg, I appreciate you, man. Thank you for pulling back the curtain. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Greg is accessible. He will meet with you and have great conversations. He's driving in a ton of value in the world. So, Greg, thank you for your time. And again, check out all those links so you can connect with Greg.
Thank you, Devin. Thanks for having me on the show. Thanks, Gary.